There is a kind of discipline that doesn't ask for permission. It doesn't wait for motivation, and it doesn't negotiate with comfort. When people encounter it, they rarely describe it as inspiring. They describe it as unsettling, not because it is loud or aggressive, but because it is quiet, relentless, and immune to excuses. It exposes something uncomfortable, the fact that most limits people live with are self-imposed, protected by habits of delay and emotional bargaining. This level of discipline does not feel heroic. It feels inevitable. Most people believe discipline is about intensity, about pushing harder, wanting something badly enough, or summoning willpower at the right moment. That belief keeps them trapped in cycles of enthusiasm and collapse. They start strong, fueled by emotion, then fade as soon as resistance appears. When the feeling disappears, so does the action. What they never realize is that emotion was never supposed to be the engine. Emotion is unreliable by nature. Discipline that lasts is built on structure, not feeling. You have likely seen someone who operates this way. They wake up at the same time every day without drama. They train, work, or practice regardless of mood. They don't talk about motivation. They don't announce resets. While others constantly begin again, they simply continue. People around them call it extreme. They say it isn't healthy, that life should be more flexible, that balance matters. What they are really saying is that this consistency makes them uncomfortable, because it removes every excuse they rely on to stay the same. There was a man named Aaron who looked successful on the surface. He was intelligent, articulate, and capable. His career was stable, his ambitions were clear, and his intentions were always strong. Yet nothing in his life lasted. Every habit followed the same predictable pattern. The first few days were filled with excitement. The second week brought friction. By the third week, the routine disappeared completely. Gym routines ended. Books were abandoned. Meditation apps sent reminders that went unanswered. Aaron wasn't lazy, and he wasn't undisciplined in the way people imagine. He was simply operating under a flawed system. Each time he failed, he blamed himself. He assumed there was something wrong with his character. He tried productivity tools, habit trackers, accountability partners, and rewards. He tried waking up earlier, setting alarms, watching motivational videos late at night. Nothing worked for long. What he didn't realize was that he wasn't failing at discipline. He was failing at design. His environment, his identity, and his decision structure were all working against him. The human brain is not built to act consistently in the presence of constant choice. Every decision, no matter how small, drains energy. When people say they lack discipline, what they usually mean is that they are exhausted from deciding, should I do it now or later? Should I rest today and start tomorrow? Should I go hard or take it easy? Each question feels harmless, but together they create a constant state of negotiation, and negotiation always favors comfort. What Aaron eventually discovered was something that ancient practitioners understood long before neuroscience had words for it. The brain categorizes commitments into two types. The first is reversible. These are things you can opt out of without consequence. They feel flexible. The second type is irreversible. These are non-negotiable. Once chosen, they simply happen. There is no debate. There is no inner discussion. The mind treats them as facts rather than options. In Zen practice, daily discipline is not framed as a choice, it is framed as an expression of identity. When the bell rings, the body moves, not because of motivation, not because of desire, but because that is what happens when the bell rings. Over time, the question of whether to practice disappears entirely. The mind no longer asks. It obeys the structure that has been put in place. Aaron realized that every habit he had ever failed was framed as an attempt. He was always trying to become someone else rather than declaring who he already was. Trying invites escape. Identity eliminates it. So instead of setting another goal, he wrote a statement that felt uncomfortable in its certainty. He didn't say he would try to train consistently. He declared himself a person who trains every day at a specific time for a fixed duration. He defined the behavior so clearly that there was no room for interpretation. Then he did something that terrified him. He made it public. He shared the declaration with people whose opinions mattered to him. Immediately, the reactions came. Some laughed, others warned him not to burn out. A few told him he was being dramatic. What none of them realized was that their skepticism was exactly what made the declaration powerful. Public commitment triggers an ancient fear rooted deep in the nervous system. Losing credibility once meant losing safety. The brain still treats social failure as a threat. The first morning after the declaration was exactly as difficult as every other attempt had been. The alarm rang. His body felt heavy. His mind produced excuses effortlessly. You're tired. One day won't matter. You can start tomorrow. But something new entered the equation. Quitting no longer meant personal disappointment. It meant public failure. It meant looking people in the eye and confirming the belief that he couldn't follow through. That image created a pressure stronger than discomfort. He stood up. What surprised him most was that the struggle didn't vanish. He still felt resistance every day. The difference was that the resistance no longer led to debate. The decision had already been made. The only thing left was execution. But another weakness soon became obvious. Even though he had committed publicly, he was still wasting energy deciding when to act. Some mornings he delayed. Other days he shifted the schedule. Each change reopened negotiation. To fix this, he removed time as a variable entirely. He chose 1 hour and treated it as fixed, not flexible. He didn't choose it because it was optimal or enjoyable. He chose it because it eliminated alternatives. There were no social obligations, no messages, no interruptions. The hour existed regardless of how he felt. His emotions were no longer relevant. The first week felt brutal. His body resisted the change violently. Sleep felt shallow. Mornings felt heavy. By the second week, something's subtle shifted. His body began adjusting. He woke moments before the alarm, not out of excitement, but out of adaptation. By the third week, his feet hit the floor before his mind fully engaged. The habit was beginning to move beneath conscious thought. That's when his mind found another way to escape. He kept changing what he did during that fixed hour. Some days he trained hard. Other days he took it easy. Sometimes he read. Sometimes he stretched. It felt productive, but it was undermining the system. Variety reintroduced choice. Choice reintroduced negotiation. Negotiation reintroduced inconsistency. So he did something that went against everything he believed about self-improvement. He removed variety. He chose one sequence of actions and repeated it exactly the same way every day. Same movements, same order, same duration. No optimization, no creativity, just repetition. Friends said he was becoming robotic. They were right. That was the point. The third and fourth weeks were mentally uncomfortable. His mind screamed for novelty. It insisted that this rigidity was unhealthy, that flexibility was smarter, that balance mattered. But slowly, the noise faded. The actions became smoother. The resistance softened. One morning he realized he had completed half the routine without remembering starting it. The behavior was no longer being driven by effort. It was being carried by structure. Then life disrupted everything, as it always does. He got sick. He traveled. He slept poorly. In the past, this would have been the end. One missed day would turn into a lost week, and the habit would quietly die. This time, he followed a different rule. He never allowed a gap. He seed the action, but he never eliminated it. When energy was low, he did less. When conditions were poor, he adjusted, but he never stopped completely. This single rule protected his identity. He was no longer someone who practiced only when conditions were perfect. He was someone who practiced regardless of conditions. The difference was profound. The habit no longer depended on circumstances. It depended on continuity. To make this unbreakable, he went further. He pre-decided every obstacle he could imagine. No gym meant floor exercises. No privacy meant silent movement. No time meant 1 minute. Exhaustion meant minimal execution. Each scenario already had an answer. When obstacles appeared, there was no thinking. The response was automatic. As the weeks passed, People noticed a change, not because he talked about discipline, but because his presence shifted. He was calmer, more stable, less reactive. Some people said he was becoming obsessive. Others said he needed balance. Those comments no longer bothered him. He recognized them as signs that he had crossed an invisible threshold. Consistency, he realized, is not something you force. It is something you become. The system didn't make him better. It made him different. He stopped negotiating with himself. He stopped relying on emotion. He stopped starting over. The behavior no longer felt like discipline. It felt like identity. What most people never realize is that once identity shifts, effort becomes unnecessary. Action stops feeling like resistance and starts feeling like alignment. The body moves because it recognizes itself in the behavior. This is why discipline that lasts often looks effortless from the outside. The struggle hasn't disappeared, but it no longer lives at the surface. It has been buried beneath repetition. Aaron began to notice something unsettling. The habits that once required mental force were now happening before conscious thought appeared. His hands moved, his body stood up, his routine unfolded in the same sequence without instruction. This wasn't motivation. It wasn't excitement. It was automation. The brain had stopped asking for permission because the answer was always the same. This is the point where many people sabotage themselves. When effort disappears, they assume something is wrong. They confuse struggle with progress and ease with laziness. They introduce complexity to feel productive again. They add new rules, new goals, new challenges. In doing so, they reintroduce decision-making and fracture the structure that made consistency possible in the first place. Aaron resisted that impulse by understanding a simple truth. Discipline is not about intensity, it is about reliability. A system that functions at 80% forever will always outperform a system that operates at 100% for a month and collapses. The goal was never to push harder. The goal was to remove friction so completely that stopping felt stranger than continuing. As the days accumulated, something deeper began to shift. His internal dialogue changed. He no longer thought of himself as someone trying to improve. He thought of himself as someone who maintained a standard. That difference altered how he responded to temptation, distraction, and stress. When people asked how he stayed consistent, he didn't have an answer that sounded impressive. He simply couldn't imagine doing it any other way. This is the part no one warns you about. When your behavior stabilizes, your environment begins to resist. Friends notice your absence. Co-workers comment on your rigidity. Family members question your priorities. Not because your behavior is harmful, but because it disrupts the unspoken agreement to stay the same. Consistency breaks the illusion that change requires special talent. It proves that structure matters more than personality. Aaron learned to see resistance from others as a sign of progress rather than a warning. The discomfort people projected onto him was never about concern. It was about comparison. His routine held up a mirror they didn't ask for. Instead of arguing, he stayed quiet. Explanation invites debate. Silence maintains momentum. There were mornings when fatigue returned, not physical exhaustion, but a dull mental heaviness. The routine continued anyway. That was the key difference. In the past, fatigue triggered reassessment. Now, it triggered execution. The system did not care how he felt. It cared only that the sequence continued without interruption. This is where most people misunderstand the idea of rest. Rest is not the absence of action. It is the intentional reduction of intensity without breaking continuity. The body recovers when stress is managed, not when identity is abandoned. Skipping feels like relief in the moment, but it quietly erodes the structure that supports future action. Doing less preserves that structure. Aaron had days where his entire routine lasted less than 5 minutes. Those days mattered more than the intense ones. They reinforced the rule that practice continues regardless of conditions. They prevented the psychological reset that comes with gaps. The habit remained alive, even when energy was low. As weeks turned into months, something else emerged. His confidence stabilized. Not the loud performative kind, but a quiet certainty. He trusted himself again. Not because he believed in his potential, but because he had evidence of reliability. Every completed day was a vote cast in favor of his identity. Those votes accumulated into something solid. Most people seek confidence before action. They want to feel ready. This is backwards. Confidence is a byproduct of consistent execution, not a prerequisite. The mind believes what behavior proves repeatedly. When action is predictable, self-trust follows naturally. Aaron stopped consuming motivational content. He no longer needed reminders or inspiration. Those things had served a purpose when structure was absent. Now they were unnecessary noise. The system carried him forward without external reinforcement. This is the quiet power of automation. It removes dependence on mood, circumstance, and belief. He also noticed that discipline in one area began leaking into others, not because he tried to expand, but because his standards had shifted. He tolerated less chaos. He wasted less time. He spoke with more clarity. Consistency created momentum, and momentum changed his relationship with effort itself. This is the compounding effect most people never reach. They quit just before the habit begins to produce secondary benefits. Early stages are maintenance-heavy and reward-light. Later stages reverse this. The habit begins supporting you instead of draining you. But to reach that point, you must survive the period where nothing feels different. Aaron reflected on his past failures with new understanding. He had always been waiting for the moment when discipline would feel natural. He didn't realize that natural behavior is manufactured through repetition. The brain does not resist consistency. It resists uncertainty. Once uncertainty is removed, resistance dissolves. There were still moments of doubt, not about whether to act, but about whether this rigidity was worth it. Those thoughts came quietly and passed just as quietly. He didn't argue with them. He didn't analyze them. Analysis invites reconsideration. He returned to execution. People often confuse freedom with flexibility. In reality, freedom emerges from constraint. When actions are decided in advance, mental space opens up. Energy previously spent on decision-making becomes available for focus and presence. The routine no longer felt like a cage, it felt like a foundation. Aaron realized that most suffering around discipline comes from trying to control outcomes instead of processes. People obsess over results while neglecting the structure that produces them. He stopped tracking progress obsessively. He trusted the process because it had already proven reliable. This trust extended beyond habits. He approached challenges differently. Instead of asking how to feel motivated, he asked how to remove choice. Instead of seeking inspiration, he designed systems. Instead of waiting for readiness, he enforced standards. The transformation wasn't dramatic. There was no single breakthrough moment. It was subtle, cumulative, and irreversible. One day he simply noticed that the person who used to quit was gone, not suppressed, not fighting, gone. That disappearance was the real victory. Because when inconsistency dies, discipline doesn't feel heroic anymore. It feels normal, and that is what truly frightens people. Not the effort, not the sacrifice, but the fact that you no longer struggle the way they do.